Hello, and welcome to Nobel Minds, a conversation with UC Berkeley's most honored professors. Welcome to parents, students, friends, faculty. We think you're going to have a good time today. I'm Mark Richards. I am the Executive Dean for the College of Letters and Science and Professor of Earth and Planetary Science here at Berkeley. And it is my honor to be here today to welcome you to what we expect to be a really wonderful event. I'm particularly honored to be representing the College of Letters and Science, which is the academic and intellectual home of all the Nobel laureates on stage here today, some of whom also have additional appointments in the Business School, Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, and elsewhere. Many of the newly admitted students in the audience today will also be making your academic home in the College of Letters and Science, and so I want to welcome you to the college and say to you and your families how delighted we are to have you here, and we hope you will be joining us soon. UC Berkeley has been widely recognized for its excellence and its consistently top-ranked programs in all fields, including engineering, physics, biology, social sciences, the arts, and the humanities. For over a century, no acknowledgement has garnered more prestige for its recipients than the Nobel Prize. UC Berkeley boasts 22 Nobel Prizes, just a few awards behind the entire country of Russia, as many as all of Canada, and more than Argentina, Belgium, and China combined. I like to add to that number that in addition to those 22 Nobel Prizes on our faculty, 25 Nobel Prizes have been won by our alumni. So it's really quite a remarkable record. Our university takes great pride in the fact that our faculty members have won Nobel Prizes in every academic candidate and category, and 8 Nobel laureates are still teaching on our campus today. Today, we are thrilled to gather 4 of those professors on this stage to discuss the role of science in our modern society and the impact of this award has had on the personal and professional paths of these distinguished colleagues. It is my great privilege to introduce the moderator of this esteemed panel, Chancellor Nick Dirks. Chancellor, go ahead. I have more to say. Nick is also a faculty member in the College of Letters and Science in both departments of history and anthropology, and he is an internationally renowned scholar in those fields. He's a leader in higher education and well known for his commitment to and advocacy for accessible, high-quality undergraduate education in the liberal arts and sciences. Chancellor Dirks came to us last year from Columbia University, where he was the Executive Vice President for the Arts and Sciences and Dean of the Faculty. As a professor, his work has focused on Asian studies, earning him numerous fellowships and scholarships, and he has authored several books on India, receiving significant scholarly honors, including the Lionel Trilling Award for his book, Casts of Mind. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Nick Dirks today.
Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you, Mark. And thanks to everyone here and in adjoining halls for coming out on one of the very best days Berkeley has to offer to attend this very special event, which I have to confess I've been looking forward to now for quite some time. Joining me shortly will be a few of our most distinguished professors, all Nobel laureates, who have been honored for their extraordinary work in expanding the boundaries of knowledge and understanding in their respective fields. As much as I am in awe of their scientific accomplishments, what really moves me about each of these scholars is the fact that they remain so dedicated to teaching and working with students from freshmen through postdocs, and that they've all chosen to devote their careers here at the University of California in Berkeley. Like the rest of our world-class faculty, they are here not despite the fact that we are a public university, but because we are a public university, with a deep commitment to access to the public good and to making the world a better place. Like their colleagues, they embody the idea that large research universities, especially great public ones, provide collegiate experiences of the highest quality for our students. It is individuals like these that drew me here from New York City to UC Berkeley, where I have joined a community of faculty colleagues who are as dedicated to developing new knowledge as they are to exploring it with their students. I know from my own experience how teaching in the classroom and conducting research in the field are pursuits that deeply enrich and animate each other. I was also drawn to Berkeley by its public mission, and it is in undergraduate education where that mission finds significant, if sometimes underappreciated, expression. Ensuring that our students all have an opportunity to engage with fundamental human debates and dilemmas, develop the skills of effective and persuasive communication, and participate in the production and development of knowledge does more than provide them with highly transportable skills for what will be a multi-career life. It is in fact precisely these tools that allow our graduates to fully engage with and contribute to society, to make a difference, to reimagine the future, and to bring vision to our lives. The challenges and the opportunities humanity faces are now global in scale, whether in the form of poverty, climate change, the quest for sustainable sources of energy, or global health issues. It is the leading public research universities like this one, with our comprehensive excellence and our focus on the greater good, which have the means and indeed the motivation to marshal and focus on the greater good, which have the means to marshal the intellectual resources necessary to confront the challenges that know no national borders and no academic boundaries. Now more than ever, we must, as a community, engage with the public at large in a conversation about the urgent need to reinvigorate the significance, the mission, and the financial foundations of our great public research universities. Now, you may have noticed the big bows that were around campus today and wondered what they signified. In 2008, we launched the campaign for Berkeley to raise $3 billion. We launched it the same week Lehman Brothers fell and Wall Street collapsed. We don't always do our timing that well, but you know. But the truth is, it was an audacious goal at the best of times, and it was not the best of times. Yet even as the state of California stepped back further from its support for public higher education, more than 280,000 donors stepped up and collectively gave $3.13 billion in support of our mission and objectives, an historic achievement not just at Berkeley, but for American public higher education. At Berkeley, we are dedicated to continue to lead during this moment of great transformation while producing the leaders and the leading ideas we need for the future. Today, we celebrate this profound accomplishment. These big bows mark new or renovated spaces made possible by donors' generosity. It is what happens inside our buildings and facilities that matters most, though, such as the efforts to address global poverty in Blum Hall, to develop alternative fuels in the Energy Biosciences building, and to prevent diseases such as cancer and Alzheimer's in the Li Ka-shing Center for Biomedical and Health Sciences. The campaign impacted nearly every area and countless people all across the campus. The number of endowed undergraduate scholarships increased by 36%. The number of endowed graduate fellowships grew by a stunning 84%. And with the help of a landmark challenge grant made possible by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, we established 154 endowed faculty chairs at Berkeley. Now, the four gentlemen joining me on this stage are sterling examples of why supporting faculty is the key to Berkeley's enduring excellence. Like so many colleagues, they are not only contributing to knowledge on a global scale, they are shaping young minds right here at Berkeley. Like their mentors, these students will then go on to do great work in their own communities, and as a result of their research, their education, and the public service they do here, those successes will not only transform them, they will continue to transform the world. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming four of UC Berkeley's most honored professors who will share their thoughts on various issues I've just raised and reflect on their own paths to where they are today. Ladies and gentlemen, Randy Schekman, Daniel McFadden, George Smoot, and Saul Perlmutter. And we are also honored to have another Nobel laureate joining us in the audience, Professor Charles Townes, who is here with his wife, Frances. Professor Townes won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1964 for his transformative work that led directly to the development of the laser, a tool that, as you know, has revolutionized industry, medicine, communications, and astronomy. Thank you so much for being here, Professor Townes. So we encourage you to join in the conversation, to submit your questions on provided index cards, and we'll get to them towards the end of our time together. But please, write your questions down, and at the appropriate time, there'll be people to pick them up and bring them up to stage. So let's get started.
Randy Schekman illuminated a fundamental process in cells, how they transport and secrete proteins. The discovery led to the mass production of valuable drugs, including insulin for the treatment of diabetes. Saul Perlmutter discovered the accelerating expansion of the universe through mapping supernovas. This led to the theory that dark energy makes up most of the universe and is pushing it apart. George Smoot obtained the first images of the infant universe, confirming the Big Bang theory. His discovery fundamentally changed the way the science of cosmology is carried out. Daniel McFadden devised a way to predict how people and organizations, faced with many alternatives, make choices. His research changed economic theory connected to both individual decision-making as well as large-scale public policy.
Great. Okay, so let's begin with the question around the place of public higher education in the nation today. There is, as you know, there has been growing critique of public institutions, even of the idea of public mission. There's a concern at the same time that higher education no longer serves something that we might call the public good. At best, it serves a private good. So my question for you, and we can address this in various ways over the course of the conversation, why have you, scholars at the very, very top of your fields, chosen to commit your lives to public higher education? Maybe we'll start with you, Randy.
Well, Chancellor, thanks for the question. I'm a creature of the University of California. I was an undergraduate at UCLA. I was a postdoctoral fellow at UCSD. I confess that I spent 4 years at Stanford, but I've been here for 38 years. So I feel very strongly about public higher education. It really has made the difference in my life. When I started in 1966 at UCLA, the tuition was $40 a term, the room and board was $400 a term. I could work a summer job and pay for the whole year. Obviously that is no longer possible, and I think that's a tragedy because 70% of the young kids in this country go to public institutions, and it has turned from what used to be an investment in the future into a private commodity that forces people to go into debt. I think that's tragic because public institutions like Berkeley are the engine of social change. So we really need to strengthen that model going forward.
So I had a different history. I went to MIT, undergraduate and graduate. And I also worked a summer job. My parents put up half the money, and I still didn't have enough to get through past the first year. And so I kept working. And that's a huge difference between the private sector and the public sector, especially in those days. But the primary reason I picked to come to Berkeley was it was a premier institution. It was a great place to do research. We were competing with different groups, and the group from Berkeley, we had to work really hard to stay even with them. And partly because it was a good first-rate university, and partly because it had a large student body who were dedicated and working hard. And so for me, the public education part is a bonus to the fact that it's an outstanding place. And the key issue is to be both public education and really the best.
In a way, we don't actually have to choose. We have the great luxury here of being so excellent academically and yet public at the same time. But how does that change things, perhaps, from your experiences in private institutions? Are they really different? Is this institution different because it is public? Saul?
I mean, my experience was I was an undergraduate at Harvard University.
I've heard
of it. You may have heard of this. It's on the other side of the country. And I came here as a graduate student, and I think that the part that struck me, and has struck me, and I'm not positive how much of it is because it's a public institution, but I think there's part of this, is that there's a very much a non-hierarchical feeling at Berkeley. And so as a young graduate student and a young postdoc, your ideas get pulled in and used, and I think that there's a much more of a reaching out to include the whole community at all levels, without very much of a sense of who's the lead professor and who's the undergraduate in a research group. Everybody's working together. And I think that feel actually is something that comes a little bit because of this long sort of democratic tradition of a public university. I mean, I'd be curious actually to hear other people's thoughts about that, but it has that feel to it.
Dan?
Well, I grew up in the rural South in a family of limited means, and I financed my first year in a public university by selling one cow. And by the way, I would like to see us return to a one cow benchmark for college tuition. I taught in both private universities, MIT, Caltech, as well as here at Berkeley. And I think the exciting thing about Berkeley is that it's so open and the student body is so diverse and there's so many opportunities that although these are great institutions, some of the other institutions, there's no substitution for the kind of diversity and opportunity that a place like Berkeley offers.
So I'd like to, I think we'll come back to some of these questions, but I'd like to ask a question now about the relationship between applied and basic research in all of your different fields. Even as there's a growing critique, I think, of the public good, there's growing emphasis on application, on usable knowledge, on things that have direct and immediate utility in some kind of way. So I'd like to ask you, even though you've all worked in some ways across basic and applied fields, what is it about basic research that is so fundamental? Why is it that we should support basic research? And how is basic research part of the mission of this great university?
To cut?
Sure.
I mean, I think that the things that George and I have done are clearly in the basic research category. It's very hard to make a direct statement that if we understood better how the distant universe works, it will impact our lives today. On the other hand, it seems that there's something, to me, almost magical about the way in which we've developed as civilizations over time, that when you try to attack these very almost poetic fundamental questions, it seems to bring out the most inventive in our societies. And it's led, I think, to these amazingly practical developments that you would never set out to build a better printer by inventing the laser. And yet, the fundamental questions that you're asking when you invent a laser somehow end up providing you the way of doing something very practical, like all the things that we now do, modern day world uses a laser for. Einstein's theory of general relativity seems to have Why would it matter what happens to time as you move a clock nearer to the speed of light? And yet, if you don't know how that works and you don't understand general relativity, we would not be able to have the accuracy of the GPS satellite locators that we have today. So, in the end of the day, I just always come back to this idea that you do it in some sense because it's this aspirational goal of humans to ask questions that move them in some deep way. And that bonus is that it's also, it seems to be the way that we make very practical advances in our societies and our economics.
I think there's an intimate connection between applied and basic research. The observations, the puzzles that we face in terms of applied work raise questions about the underlying sources of these problems. And if you understand the underlying sources, you begin to see how to solve the puzzles. And it's certainly been true in my work, for example, where it was a very applied problems that motivated my work, which relied heavily on developments in mathematics and psychology, as well as economics.
Mm-hmm. Randy, you want to?
Yes, so in the life sciences, there are enormous practical applications of the basic knowledge that my colleagues and I have discovered here at Cal. I'll give you one terrific example. A colleague in the immunology division of my department was studying how immune cells are regulated in the way they attack tumors. And he found a way of unleashing the power of T cells in attacking tumors with a simple treatment that worked in animals. He was then able to take this to a biotech company and eventually to the clinic. And several years ago, it was approved as the first very effective immune therapy for melanoma, for which there was no treatment, no effective treatment or cure. And yet, with his discovery at a very basic level, now a good fraction of patients who would otherwise have succumbed to melanoma can be effectively cured. This all comes from basic discoveries of how cells and organisms work. And it does not come, in my opinion, when the work is directed in a top-down manner to try to find with a particular goal in mind. I think what we're most effective at here at this institution is understanding the fundamental laws of nature. And that's really the kind of work that I feel strongly we should support here.
Right.
So I'll try and keep it short because this is actually an interesting and complex question. Yeah. Why people do these kinds of research. Some people just want to know how things work. Some people want to do something that's important. Some people want to, solve a particular problem, right? It's depending on what their motivation were. But what we've seen is all the really transformative, changes in our lives have come from basic research where something came completely out of left field that no one expected. You were doing research for something else, and you discovered this principle, and it comes to do that. And so the example that I've given before is a little over 100 years ago, we discovered the electron. And almost 65% of the economy of the world is manipulating, moving electrons around. That's all you guys do, right? Store information is sending electrons from one place to another and telling him to do stuff. Even your body is moving electrons around to do chemistry. So, who would have ever, paid for Thomson to do research in discovering whether it was an electron or not, right? It wouldn't have been motivated. Only after you make the discovery, you suddenly have TV, you suddenly have all these other things. And so just sometimes answering a fundamental question tells you how things fit together. Sometimes they lead to tremendous transformation.
So you never know. It's a good thing in and of itself, in and of and for itself, basic research, but it has all these other kinds of sometimes unintended outcomes and results. I want to shift a little bit to talk about the issue of collaboration. I spent a number of years at Columbia as a dean of the faculty. I used to evaluate faculty files, and sometimes you would get papers, whether in economics or physics, that would have 100 names attached to it. Now, this is a group that is associated with, and I am absolutely of that camp, with individual genius. But on the other hand, you all are part of a landscape in which we rely increasingly on collaboration. That's really part of how we can innovate, discover. Could you say something about how, first of all, the nature of collaboration might have changed over the course of your careers, and secondly, about what and how collaboration works when you're thinking about science, but nevertheless working with possibly people across the globe?
All right, I guess I'll start because everybody else is. This is a really complicated question, but when I started out as a graduate student, I worked on a large group of 4 people doing a major experiment, and now those same kinds of experiments are done with a few thousand people. And I moved from that field into a field which there were many smaller number of people, and now we're seeing large collaborations form in astrophysics and cosmology, just because the problems we were attacking are much greater and we need bigger inequality. And people specialize and they do stuff. There's lots of questions in that, but what I find is as we move to more complex problems, that you need people across disciplines. First across disciplines in physics, now even from chemistry to physics or to biology to physics. We're integrating the knowledge a lot more. You need more expertise from a larger area because you're synthesizing much more.
So, personal history here at Cal, I was hired in 1976 to an outstanding biochemistry department. It was one of 16 different life science departments in the College of Letters and Sciences. Lots of little silos with very little interaction. And one of the important things that the man who hired me, Daniel Koshland, did was to organize a major life science change that resulted in the fusion of a number of departments, and I think that's been much to our benefit, and I think it could continue on this campus because it brought together people with very different ideas in a more common element in the same department where they interacted with one another and they hadn't before. So I think even on this campus, that kind of collaboration has changed dramatically in the past 25 years.
I should also add one other element to this, which is my personal experience has been almost completely collaborative, and it's partly because I don't think the projects that we were doing could have been done by just one person by themselves. But it's also, in my mind, one of the real pleasures of doing science. I've been commenting to people that there's this myth of the lone scientist in a lab coat going off by themselves and coming out with the eureka, the answer. But my experience has been the exact opposite, and that almost all the pleasure that I've had, the most pleasure I've had, is this give and take and social discussions of every good idea with around the table in a group meeting, or in all sorts of pairwise discussions in a group. And I've been saying that if you really want to be a lone person, maybe go and be an artist. But if you want to really be a social person, and have a great time with a lot of other people in your work, just be a scientist. It's really a place to be sociable.
It's a better social life.
I'll give you one example of collaboration, which reflects on the students at Berkeley. When I was running a lab in the 70s, the work that I actually got the prize for, it was an economics lab, but I hired students who did computer science and statistics and so forth to help me as well. One of my students went on to found Sun Microsystems, another went on to write Berkeley Unix. So that was an example of a collaboration which involves students with great opportunities across different disciplines to connect and organize research.
We've gone from collaboration in a way to questions of interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity. Has the landscape of disciplinary collaboration, cooperation, exchange, and the like expanded? Or is it just that in some ways we're more alert to it? Because increasingly we hear from colleagues that the really great discoveries happen when people from different disciplines get together, when people with different kinds of experiences, different kinds of perspectives and skills. What is your view about the nature of interdisciplinary work and even how that should be organized in the university?
My sense is that it's always hard to start interdisciplinary work in most parts of the academic world, just because people organize by departments. It's so much to start with. But Berkeley's, I think, had a particularly strong tradition of trying to find ways to bridge those gaps. And I think everybody, even though they are working in these separate departments, they all know that they find some of their best experiences when they get a chance to move across to areas that are just beyond where they've been working previously, or sometimes even dramatically beyond. At this current moment, I'm particularly interested in this very question because one of the things that we're developing at Berkeley right now is this very interdisciplinary possibility of doing a institute for data sciences. And the idea is that so many of the different fields are now using very sophisticated data analysis in order to accomplish all these myriad different goals. And so they now have a tool in common that allows them to have a real good excuse to get together and work on problems because they need each other's experience and expertise. And then they need the expertise from the experts in the computing sciences and statistics and information sciences that they never before have realized that they had so much in common with. So I'm actually at the moment feeling rather excited about the idea that we'll have more excuses for people to look into each other's research areas and give a hand, and we may end up with some whole new collaborations that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. And that's always one of the more exciting things at a university, when you come up with another way to accomplish that.
So life sciences has become much more quantitative in recent years. And we are now attracting faculty in areas that we would not have done in the past. And I think it'll be important to build a bridge to other departments that are strong in computational sciences, and your initiative is one way of doing that. So we will continue to evolve in that direction, taking advantage of the strengths that we have elsewhere on the Berkeley campus.
Mm-hmm. In the social sciences, one of the things that Berkeley has done is form a experimental laboratory which spans the social sciences, and that has become a focal point for people from different disciplines to get together and work collaboratively, and I think a very effective tool.
Now,
I was going to give a sort of a strange example, just in case somebody in the audience is not into science or economics. And so recently, partly because I guess I'm a Nobel laureate and my name on the proposal helped get money, was involved in an interdisciplinary project that was art, computer science, and physics. And the idea was to make a sculpture, which is now displayed in a museum, that's squaring the circle. And so squaring the circle is a long historical problem that people realized you can't do that in a finite number of steps, because originally mathematicians discovered transcendental numbers, which take an infinite number of digits, so it would take an infinite number of steps. But people knew it was a difficult problem in the old days, but they used to represent in the medieval paintings, a circle meant the divine or the infinite, and a square meant the man-made. And so if you actually remember the Viterbi man from Leonardo da Vinci, he's touching, the human's the only ones that touch both. He's touching the circle with one set of hands, he's touching the square with the other. And so it's a problem that's on our psyche and inspiring artists. And so it was a collaboration of computer science artists and physicists that ended up with this sculpture that when you shine the light, it goes up to this very complicated lens and shines on the circle, and the shadow is a square, right? And so, it's not that spectacular, but it was fun.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. You know, in thinking about both collaboration and interdisciplinary work and going outside of our usual workspaces, it occurs to me that, of course, one of the things, and some of you have already mentioned this, one of the things that draws faculty sometimes really outside their comfort zone is when we teach undergraduates. It's often in our classrooms that we get those questions that, just don't occur to us on our regular watch. Could you say something about some of your experiences with the undergraduates here and how they've helped push you and pull you into new places?
Well, I can start. So I teach 2 undergraduate classes. In fact, I'm teaching an undergraduate class right now. In the fall term, I teach freshman seminar. And I had no experience in teaching at any level when I arrived at Cal. And when I first started, I was thrust in front of 150 pre-medical students who just wanted to know what was going to be on the exam. But I've learned actually to appreciate the experience, and I find that by teaching undergraduates specifically, my own lecturing skills have been sharpened so that I'm better able to explain myself in a professional setting to other colleagues who are not in my discipline. And I find that people who don't have that experience, people who teach in research institutes or in medical schools actually generally don't have those skills because they haven't had that, I call it an opportunity to teach undergraduates.
Well, I guess I'll say a few more words because I can't help myself. But actually, I find teaching undergraduate and having undergraduates do research projects with you are challenging in very different ways. And for a while, I was teaching upper division and graduate courses, hadn't been teaching. And I came back and started teaching undergraduate courses. And the very first class, I'd look out in the audience and I'd say, wow, this place is ethnically diverse. I mean, you could not believe the range of people you saw taking this class. And this is a class that was for scientists and engineers and, the people who had to take this gateway course to get through. And it was incredible, the diversity and the outfits and the name. You look down the list of names, it was pretty amazing. And yet the students were eager and they were paying attention. And when I did some of the first demos, they whipped out their cell phones and videoed it. I said, uh-oh, I have to be careful now. Because they like it when like 1 in 5 demos fails and you have to do it over again because then it puts a little suspense in it. But you do get to the point where you have to learn to explain things to people in a way that they stay engaged and actually have some student participation. Because you have 200 people in your class in a big lecture hall, you really have to make sure that they're there paying attention. And there's a whole range of responses. And you're always pleased by the really, the eager students who are asking really difficult and unusual questions. And so now you have to explain, how does an electric wheel keep from getting shocked itself, right? Mm-hmm. That comes up in the lecture, right? And you have to go in the next lecture and explain to them how the eel's so clever that it doesn't get shocked, right? Mm-hmm. So you learn some new things and you learn new ways of presenting. And it's really a good experience, but it's the give and take. It's like the collaboration. We have a collaboration with our students and a collaboration with our students that work with us in our labs that goes on both just as we have with our colleagues.
And you just really led me into the next question, and in part, we can stay with this, but one of the things that has struck me, of course, when I came here from New York, from Columbia, from the Ivy League, is just the extraordinary diversity of the student body. It's wonderfully enriching to see this diversity. And I was wondering if you had some more examples of how working with this diverse population has animated your own lives here as both teachers and researchers.
Well, I can say what I particularly appreciate, and I think is not the same at the very selective private institutions, is the demographic profile of the students at this institution is remarkable. I mean, I think you've all heard the numbers. 30% of our kids come from families with a net income of less than $40,000 a year. Approximately that fraction of the kids come with Pell Grants. I saw a statistic this morning that Berkeley, among the top 20 institutions in the U.S. News and World Report, is by far the highest, has by far the highest proportion of Pell grantees. And I think that's wonderful because these kids come with a sense of excitement and not of entitlement and privilege. And I have to say that my colleagues at the selective private institutions often complain to me that they see these kids who have this sense of entitlement, which I have never in 38 years seen here at Cal.
And I think it's worth also just commenting. And I think the combination of that with the fact that these are just remarkable students to be teaching. I mean, I find that they're amazingly on top of things. This year we're trying out this new course as one of these big idea courses that was developed by Mark Richards. There he is. Here at Berkeley, the idea of these interdisciplinary courses that would be on some idea that would be too big that you would ever imagine for any ordinary course. And this particular course, I was teaching it with a social psychologist and a philosopher and myself. It's called Sense and Sensibility in Science, and it's about how you can use the tools of thinking that we've developed in science for many purposes, and then how it helps you understand science. But we've tried to do it with many examples of ways in which we fall into certain standard errors, either as groups when we're trying to make decisions together or individually. And so we would often do these example experiments where we'd run it on the students in the class. And we found that almost any example we gave wouldn't work because our students were so sharp that they would see through what it was that we were trying to demonstrate, and then they would not fall into that trap. And of course, we'd be reduced to showing them the results that you get from typical college students at places like Stanford.
Excellent.
Which of course we made a lot of hay out of. But that was, but effectively we were really struck by what a sharp bunch of students you get here, and and it's I don't know whether it's because of or despite of but in any case it's the case that we have this amazingly diverse group and an amazingly capable group of students. It's just remarkable.
So I'd like to now ask to make sure that all of you who have questions could put your cards, send your cards to the aisles, and they'll be picked up and we'll start getting them ready to queue up in a few minutes. I'd like to shift now to slightly more directed questions about the Nobel. Could you tell us some, at least, of the ways in which that phone call that came out here in California very early in the morning, how that changed your life?
Well, I would say that you become a savant on every subject, including things you know nothing about. So one of the difficulties is to avoid doing too many supermarket openings and to try to stick to the subjects you know. And of course, another challenge is for me, and I think for many others, is that it's not the end of your research career. Many of us want to go on working, and so you have to be careful to compartmentalize, keep the Nobel under control.
By the way, if you don't know this yet, you'll see it when you go out and walk around campus and you see the NL parking signs. One challenge these gentlemen don't have is how to find a parking spot on the Berkeley campus. But, sorry.
So it was, about an hour after I got the phone call that I started having a third job, because teaching was a job and research was a job, and being a Nobel laureate was a job. And the first thing was the director of LBL and the chancellor wanted to schedule at their convenient time a press conference, right? Which wasn't in those days good time because the East Coast wanted to go to press before that conference. But so immediately you have to come in and do this event, and then the chancellor immediately scheduled me for 3 events because it was homecoming week. So I got dragged to homecoming to meet all the alumni, and they wanted to have a special dinner, and the dinner was during the time, when I was teaching one of the big courses I mentioned before. I was scheduling, you have to schedule exams in the evening to get a lecture hall big enough. They wanted to have the dinner during the exam, but I had to finish making the exam. So that's just you suddenly get a new workload, and it takes a while. It took me more than a year to start being comfortable being a Nobel laureate because I was getting all these emails saying, it's traditional that the new Nobel laureate does X. Right? And you don't know whether it's traditional or not. There's no handbook. I tried to get them to create a handbook on what to do. But even the Nobel Foundation, they have jobs for you. So.
Oh, I bet. Randy?
As you said, suddenly you're thrust on a stage that you didn't have before, and actually I've used the opportunity to make very strong statements about public education and about scientific publication policies, and so I welcome that chance to say things that I used to say and no one would listen, and now so actually I've enjoyed that.
But Saul, has it also allowed you to venture further in your intellectual and scientific life?
I mean, in some ways, it's interesting because I think it makes it a little bit harder in your own original area because, in some sense, the people who you were working with, they already knew you, and either they respected what you did or they didn't. It doesn't change whether you had a Nobel Prize. What it does do is allow you to actually start some conversations, outside your immediate close research area, and and I think it seems like if you're going to be asked to be an ambassador for science anyway, it does feel like it's a moment that you could try to ask some of the questions that you always were interested in asking, as you just described. In my case, I've been interested in questions that have to do with what can we do to raise the general level of public discourse in our society, and now you have an easier time calling people up and talking to them who may want to work with you on something of that sort. So if you're forced to switch areas anyway for some of your time, ideally you can do something that you actually cared about doing at the same moment. I will say, though, that this issue of not having any handbook, I was trying to think about this when you head out to Stockholm for the events that they organize for the Nobel Prize. It started to occur to me that we have to set up a Berkeley Nobel Laureates webpage just to keep track of what it was we figured out that you're supposed to be doing when you get there, since nobody tells you anything until, unless you get this background of a conversation. So it's great to win a Nobel Prize at Berkeley, because at least you have some people to talk to.
Indeed. But it's a major shift in life. Recently in the New York Times there was a column by Nicholas Kristof who complained about the paucity of public intellectuals in American life. I think we have examples here of people who have been public intellectuals in all kinds of ways, but the Nobel does give you a kind of pulpit, a kind of platform on which to talk about issues of public importance, both with direct relevance and relationship to your own work, and in a much broader way. So what are some of the issues that you've turned to in your post early AM phone call moment as a result, in part, of the kind of pull to a slightly more public intellectual position as part of the Nobel? Dan?
Well, I have certainly gotten involved heavily in the American healthcare system, and working with Medicare and with the National Institute of Health on trying to sort out how our system works and how it can be improved, because there's a lot of room for improvement. And I have an opportunity to persuade occasionally people who are in policy-making positions to think through the economics of how this system is organized. And I would say that, perhaps with the exception of the state of Georgia and Alabama, we are fairly persuasive.
George?
I've got engaged a lot in public education. I realize it's really important to society and the world as a whole that there be people who are rational thinkers and are able to understand some of the global problems that we're facing and try and deal with them. But it's also just we need a lot of people who are technically capable of running society. And so I've been engaged in public education, sort of an outgrowth of having been in a public institution. So I've been engaged in a number of places, but the biggest effort and sometimes the most scary effort is Africa, where we're trying to do a lot of stuff. And I actually was friends with the head of Eutelsat, which does a lot of communication satellites, try and convince them that they should beam some bandwidth down to Africa, which is their largest growing customer base for the future, to provide education, to get them access to the internet that most people don't have. Even if you have a cell phone, you don't really have much access to it. So Africa is a very challenging place, but it's a continent that's actually desperately in need of education, desperately in need of technical, capable people. And so we have a number of initiatives going on there, but it turns out to be much easier to do in developing countries than in countries that are free developing stage. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've taken a very strong position on open access publication policies for the life science literature, and I used the occasion of my trip to Stockholm to write an editorial that was published in The Guardian that caused quite a stink. And so although people who knew me knew that I had the same attitude on October 6th, suddenly after October 7th, by expressing these attitudes, it generates a lot more attention. And so I've exploited that attention to make the case for open access publication.
Saul?
I mentioned that I've been very interested in this question of what can you do to raise the general level of the public conversation, public discourse. So that's something that I've been trying to work in a number of different places, some foundations and National Academy of Science work. But the other role that you end up getting pulled into, and I'm imagining that this happens actually for a number of us, is the role of ambassador for science. So you're asked, and I've ended up going to Washington a number of times now to the Congress and the agencies, trying to make the case for why is it, I mean, it's basically that same question you asked at the very beginning of our conversation, about why is it that it's so important for our country to work on fundamental basic science when you don't see it as the next immediate need that next year, and yet it's the place that it has to get done. It has to be done at a national scale. So I've ended up spending a lot of time on that as well.
Well, I'd like to use that to turn to the question of what are some of the most daunting challenges facing us as scientists and social scientists in terms of research support, certainly federal support, as well as state support, but also in terms of the political environment within which we work, the kind of support there is or isn't, as the case may be, for certain kinds of areas of exploration, the politicization of things as various as stem cell research or climate science or for that matter, healthcare. What are some of the things that you think we really have to worry about in terms of the contemporary landscape around the kind of research that you've been part of, that has been in our country for the most part very well supported, but which is now in some danger?
Maybe just to follow through a little bit on what I was just saying, my sense is that one of the reasons that I've been spending so much time in Washington these days is that we've seen, because of all the deadlock in Washington, it's hit science in a very odd way. When you have a stasis in Washington, when people are doing these sequesters and continuing resolutions for many years without a budget, in many areas of government, that just means that whatever was happening earlier continues to happen. But in sciences, it has a very strange effect because you can't continue to do whatever you were doing previously in the sciences and expect that to be good. You need to be able to move on to the next areas. And what it's meant is that almost all of the large, exciting projects that I've been aware of that we were about to begin in the sciences in the United States basically were put on hold. And this, as I was saying at some point, there was no project that was too inexpensive for us to reject, and not to get started on. It's just been a period in which nothing's been moving ahead, and I see that as a serious threat to the ability of the United States to stay in the forefront as it has done for decades. If this political stalemate makes it impossible to actually move things forward. So that was a sort of unusual aspect of this particular political period.
Well, in the 70 years since the Second World War, the United States has become a dominant player in the world, largely because of open immigration, easy transition of meritorious people from lower social and economic groups into the mainstream. And that's fed a huge amount of innovation in this country, and I think the number of Nobel Prizes that have been collected by United States scholars is an indication of how effective that open system was. I think we're now in the danger of ossifying and closing down those routes for bringing in innovative people and giving them the opportunity. And I think that's perhaps the biggest challenge that we face in the coming decades is to get our mojo back and get bright people moving up in the system and innovating.
We talked about public support, but of course there are other modes of supporting some of the science, some of the social science we do. I think that at Berkeley itself, more and more faculty are engaged in various kinds of private-public partnerships. There was another piece in the New York Times recently talking about the amount and the significance of private support through foundations for the sciences. and even some concern as to whether or not that would change the direction of science, although there were concerns after the war about whether the public interest in and state support for science would direct it towards particular outcomes like the Cold War ends and so on and so forth. Could you just say something perhaps about the world of private support? Yeah.
So when we recruit a young scholar in the biomedical sciences at Berkeley, we used to rely on support from the state to help that individual set up his or her laboratory. But that's changed just in the last half dozen years. At the same time that it's incredibly expensive to set up a young investigator so that they can begin their career, they're facing a difficult task getting federal support. And we, as an institution, as a public institution, have difficulty providing funds from the state for that purpose. And so there, at this point, is no substitute for private philanthropy to help us establish funds for endowed chairs and for the kind of equipment that a young scholar needs to get going. When they can't rely on the state, when they can't rely on the federal government, they have to rely on this institution. And it's the friends and alumni of this institution that will bridge that gap going forward.
So, I mean, I agree. We're particularly, the public institutions are way more, dependent upon partnership from the private sector, private donors, and foundations giving money to keep the quality of the place up and to be able to attract the talent. And it's clear, we used to be very egalitarian when I first came to Berkeley. The idea that one professor would get a different salary than another wasn't taken very well. But now we depend on having chairs and being able to make offers, and particularly getting startup money from whatever source we can. And that's critical to keep this the #1 institution, right? If you don't have that, you just won't stay in the top level.
So the time has come to have me ask some of the questions that have come in from you, and I'm just going to take them as they came. So editorial control is now relinquished to you. How do you balance work and family life? Saul.
Well, we'll begin by asking my wife and daughter in the front row.
Exactly.
Basically, the idea is to include them in every one of these conversations as often as possible. But my sense is actually this is becoming the challenge for not just Nobel laureates, right? This is the challenge in our world these days for everybody. And personally, my main job is to try and make sure that I get home by bedtime, so I can be there to tell the bedtime story or to sit there whenever I can. And it works some of the time. My daughter's shaking her head. It's not working enough.
Well, I never found it to be that difficult. My kids know me, they recognize me. Although when I was a graduate student, I worked through the night. I didn't have kids then, and when I had kids, I decided that my place, at least most evenings, was at home. We always sat down and had dinner together, and most weekends. And I felt that that wasn't a difficult balance, at least for me.
So the next question actually turns the tables a little bit on that same question. What do you think the future of public higher education holds for elevating the presence of women in the fields of science and mathematics?
So this is a good question, because there's all men sitting up here.
We noticed.
Although when
I think they finally
when we
noticed,
do
yeah.
go to some Nobel laureate meetings, there are some women, but there are not so many. I mean, and they tend to be in more concentrated in some fields than others. Although I have to, one of my heroes is Madame Curie, who managed to get 2 prizes in 2 different fields. So, but the fact is, undergraduates in physics, there's a substantial number of undergraduates. There's slightly less graduate students. But we made a conscious effort. I was recruiting chair for a long time. We made a conscious effort to do that, and we had the advantage for two terms in a row. We had women chairs of the department, which which was assigned to that. And so what we're seeing is it's balancing back up of women taking more of a role, but you have to realize all of us got the Nobel Prize for work we did like 15 years earlier, right? And so if some great woman researcher's made a great discovery, she probably won't get the prize for 15 more years, right? So there's a big lag in the system, but I would not be surprised to see women at Berkeley get a Nobel Prize.
Well, in economics, if you consider it a science,
Dismal though it may be.
dismal at least, over half our graduate students are now women. We've also had some outstanding women on our faculty. Unfortunately, one of the problems with women is that if they're good, there are very many demands on their time. So our three most prestigious women faculty all have been in Washington at various times. And right now, Janet Yellen has just taken over the Federal Reserve. So we have a wealth of talent, and I think in the future we will see Nobel Prizes given to women in economics.
So I'm going to put together two questions. I'll read them sequentially. If you have one piece of advice for an undergrad, what would it be? And I'll go to the second question. What is UC Berkeley doing to make basic scientific research a dream job for high school kids who are more into video games, Facebook, and have no clue what made those appliances possible in the first place?
You take that one.
But it seems to me the piece of advice that I've been giving is that being an undergraduate at Berkeley gives you this amazing opportunity, because of that very little bit of hierarchy that I described earlier, to join research groups. And you can, and what's amazing is how many of the undergraduates here can walk right in and find top-notch research to work on as an undergraduate, and they'll be part of the projects that lead to all the great discoveries. The paper that my Nobel Prize is usually cited with had a couple of undergraduates working on the team, and then one student who had actually been an undergraduate started with us and then stayed for another year or so before going to graduate school, working with our group, and they were all authors on the papers as well. So it seems to me that's one of the real opportunities that Berkeley has to offer. Now, for the students who are engaged in video games, of course, my assumption is that will mean that they are so data literate and programming capable that by the time they come here, they'll easily jump right in to all the things that we've been describing earlier in a data literate world.
Yeah, I agree with Saul. There's no substitute in my mind for a bright young, even freshman, getting involved in the laboratory. I had that opportunity when I was a freshman at UCLA. I had an honors chemistry section. It was taught by Willard Libby, who got his PhD here. He was the inventor of carbon-14 dating. And the great thing about that class was you were assigned to a professor's lab to work. This was the third term of my freshman year, and I never left the lab after that. And I've had great experiences with undergraduates here. My first undergraduate student, when I just was unpacking my boxes, did so well that she's now a member of the National Academy of Sciences, is the scientific director of the Moore Foundation. And so the world is one's oyster here as a student at Cal.
This may be a different form of the same question, but here it is. Peter Thiel, well-known VC founder of PayPal, plays down the importance of college and talks about college as an outdated institution that only serves the interests of those in charge of these schools. Is that what he says? I'll have some words with Peter Thiel. What are your thoughts on the tangible or intangible benefits of college?
I guess I'll chirp in here because I have some opinion. The education is extremely good. The most important, it's called a university because you're supposed to get a universal education, not just one for a job or to do. You're supposed to learn not only how to live your life, but some broad view of history and society and everything else. Even history teachers have their places here. It's very important to have the big perspective about what's been going on in the world, what the trends are, because you see them over and over again. I mean, I see what's going on in Russia, and having studied Russia, I know the czars did it 3 times before Putin, and then it's the same pattern being repeated over and over again, slightly different variations, but very predictable. It's going to cause repercussions in our world about the openness of science, and I got visited by FBI guys saying, "What were you doing in Russia last year?" Right? And I was trying to bring the level of science and education up, right? But various things are going to happen. And so there's a tremendous reason to have a college education or university education. Now, you may have arguments about whether your training for your job is worth the money, but you've got to realize you get more from college than just the job training. You should be making friends for life, people who are like you, share values, are going to go on a longer time. You should get this perspective, and hopefully you'll learn the skill on how to learn, because the world, because of sciences, the world is going to change a lot between the time you graduate and the time you're ready for a mid-career change.
I would say that if you come to Berkeley and you major in mathematics or physics or biology, think of those as liberal arts. They are basically training in the breadth of thought, your background, and your ability to think analytically. And those are going to be useful to you no matter what you do in your life. And it sounds like they would be useful for the founder of PayPal, because when that gets replaced by the next payment mechanism, what's he going to do for work?
Good point. No, in fact, Tom Friedman did a piece recently having interviewed people at Google and asked about why and how they make their decisions about hiring. It turns out that critical and analytic thinking, rather than any particular training, are by far the most important thing they look for.
Yeah.
And that's
I'm sure
how we train students here.
All of us have students that work at Google. I mean, I have students and graduate students who work with me that now have jobs at Google. Right? So.
We got a lot more college graduates and Berkeley graduates than there are there who didn't go to college and followed Peter Thiel's. So we've dealt with that question? Okay. So
Take a vote.
what one public policy action would you take to ensure that the U.S. still maintains the Nobel advantage 25 years from now? Randy.
So one of the problems, and this addresses the question that was posed before, is not only the paralysis in our political system in funding, but it's also I think a bad trend in the management of science, for top-down management of science by administrators in Washington. The budget of the National Institutes of Health, which funds most biomedical science in this country, has dropped dramatically, and that, of course, is because of the political issue. But it's also the problem is exacerbated by the leadership of the NIH, which wants to involve itself in managing, top-down managing of our effort, and at the expense, I would say, of the curiosity-driven science that has powered us, and I think of almost all Nobel laureates. So to the extent that that can change, I think it should. In fact, I was amazed to read in the report Science Endless Frontiers, written in the late 1940s by Vannevar Bush, that he, though he was a politician and an advisor to presidents, spoke very forcefully about the importance of basic investigator-initiated science, and to the exclusion of government control of what we do. And if we're going to continue this tremendous string of success we have in this country, it's going to be by continuing to invest at that level, I would say.
So I have to chime in again, sorry. I spent a lot of time in other places around the world, and I have to say, when I look at it, I see the United States, North America have tremendous advantages. The U.S. has great demographics compared to many places in the world. It has a fundamentally sound economy, has a wonderful geographic position, it has a good culture to start with, although it's frayed around the edges. But in terms of making things go, what we're complaining about is that the rest of the people here aren't paying attention to the fact that the world is changing and that we have to compete in a changing world, and we can't be paralyzed, and we do need to invest in education in order to be able to make the most of our talent, bringing in the very best people as an immigration issue, and really funding the fundamental research at a reasonable level with this degree of freedom. The importance of free, having not your research directed, but actually choosing to do the right things is very important. If you screw up too many times, they don't fund you anymore, right? But they shouldn't stop you from pursuing something interesting.
Part of this, and you've all alluded to it in different ways, part of the genius of the American system of higher education is that we bring together different things that are in other systems kept apart. Teaching undergraduates, doing advanced research, thinking about preparation for careers, and thinking about the broad issues that are part of the liberal arts and sciences. This is a model now that is increasingly being copied in other parts of the world, not always successfully and not yet in ways that have really, for example, impacted the way in which the U.S. is represented in global rankings around the quality of our educational institutions. But there are times and there are ways in which it seems that some of the kinds of forms of support for the university as we have it, this mix of different kinds of things, different disciplines, different levels of education, advanced research, freshman seminars, doesn't have the same kind of support either from the government or from some of the public. Do you think we're going to be able to keep this system as strong as possible? I guess that's another way of asking, in effect, the same question. But I guess part of it, too, is to what extent is it precisely the way in which we teach these creative subjects, history, but also philosophy and English and literature and the arts, and have them right there next to the sciences?
I mean, for me, it's crucial to have these things all in one place, because I do think it really makes a very big difference, at least personally, to have that sense of this conversation going on across all these different domains of thought. I mean, I'm an optimist, that eventually we'll find our way out of this current, at times slightly anti-intellectual, mode. And I'm assuming that there's, a bit of a pendulum swinging, and eventually we'll get back to another period again where the people will recognize that they want to build on on this amazing university system that's been developed. Right now, I think it's a little bit harder to see, but I do have a sense that that there is a strong understanding in for example, California, that they actually do have something good here, and when it's ignited, I think it actually people really want to see it happen.
So another question from the floor: what big question do you want answered soon? This is feeling more and more like an oral exam up here, I think.
Well, in our field, George and I, there happen to have been a couple of very exciting announcements in the last few weeks, even that I think we're very much looking forward to seeing the answers to. One is this possibility that you can actually learn something about this primordial fluctuation, the original bouncing around that seems to have ignited what we now think of as the Big Bang. And I think it would just be remarkable if that turns out to be correct, and we actually get a chance to learn something about that first fraction of a second of the universe that may tell us something really deep about how the world's put together, how it all works.
So I've taken advantages to motivate me, because I'd just been in West Africa and I came back and got the terrible flu, and I was slowly recovering from it. And then the discovery was announced, and I dragged myself in to read all the literature and figure this out. And since then, with my collaborators, we've put out 3 papers. We think we have a good idea of how the things might have started. And so it's a kind of excitement. It's like you're on the trail of who the Easter Bunny had the eggs or whatever it is, some great treasure you're going to find. It's really exciting when you're on that trail. It's only more exciting if you actually find the answer, right? And so the field is all stirred up. It's like the water's boiling everywhere, because everybody knows something is breaking. If this turns out to be true, something is breaking. It's going to be, these kind of circumstances come along every few years, and you just jump onto it and take it.
One big
Yeah.
question. I'd like to see Alzheimer's cured before it's too late. and there's quite a great deal of promise, actually. So we'll see.
I was going to say, on that vein, I'm actually fairly hopeful about cancer, although it continues to be a devastating disease. But in general neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's being the principal example, remain a serious, difficult challenge. We just lost a colleague here in my department to ALS. He was at the peak of his strength 5 years ago, running, very active, and just withered away over 5 years, turned into nothing. And it was devastating to see him decay in that way. And we all have personal experiences of that sort, and yet there really is so little to do. That remains, to my mind, the greatest challenge in biomedical science.
So, this is a hard question. If you answer it exactly as it's posed. If you choose one word that brought you the Nobel Prize, what would it be?
One word?
One word.
Or where? Diligence. Diligence.
Let me put this in a slightly different context. I'd like to just, as we're about to close, I'd like to ask each of you just to say a few things about the life journey that led to the Nobel, the kinds of things that made it possible for you to realize what was obviously prodigious talent and aptitude, but just tell us a little bit more about the journey from first to college and then to that moment when you received word that you had been given the greatest award possible for work in science and economics in the world. So, who can begin?
Well, do you want to follow up first?
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that I think that the question about the single word is related to I think what seems to be one of the better parts of the story for myself, which is I was always somebody who was interested in the very fundamental questions. How does the world, universe put together? How does it work? But also, how does the mind work? How do we how we think? And that was really what I wanted to find when I went to graduate school, questions to ask of that kind. And I was, for a while, worried that I wouldn't find a really good, meaty question of that sort that was practical, that you could actually do a project on. And I was lucky enough to come across this problem that was, I felt deep enough and fun enough. It was a measurement that you could actually make, a practical measurement that would tell you whether or not the universe would someday come to an end. And also a practical measurement that would tell you whether or not the universe was infinite or not. I thought, now that's exactly the kind of problem I always hoped you could go out and make a measurement of. And I'd say that the combination of having an inspiring topic to work on and a setting in which people were really supportive of letting you keep trying and failing is I think, the full story for me. And there was this sense that we had a really difficult project. It was going to take us 3 years to get there when we began. 3 years in, we had not found our first supernova, these stars that we were going to use to make the measurement. It was 6 years in before we actually had demonstrated that we knew how to make the measurement. It was 9 years before we actually had the data. But we were actually charged up and excited and persistent and optimistic. And that's what made it fun. It made it feel like we were onto something. But that never would have happened, I think, if you weren't in an environment of like Berkeley and an environment of like this combination of the university and national lab, where people really wanted to make sure that it was possible to try something and get it to happen with this open-ended opportunity. And I don't think today it would have been as easy to make that happen. I think if you had to write a proposal and you hadn't found the answer by the 3 years that you said it would take, you might not have been able to continue. And so that combination, I think for me, was really what made all the difference and meant that we were able to get this result. It took us 10 years to see the answer. And I don't think at any point along the way we felt disappointed. And I think we were just excited and charged up that we were about to get there. And none of us were disappointed that it took the 10 years instead of the 3 at the end.
Thanks, Saul. George?
Well, I have a similar kind of story. It took me more years. But it's that's why I tried to have one word be diligence, but it's persistence and diligence were it's more than just persistent, because you keep trying something and bang your head against the wall, it's not enough. So this is, I distilled a lot of this into advice that I give to the young people that work with me, and that is always pick an important problem to work on, but one you can get to the answer in less than 5 years, right? Because there are many really important questions, and many of them have been around for 100 years, and it's really difficult, like squaring the circle. And and for me, it was thinking about what were important problems and thinking about what new things have opened up or what new ideas have opened up that would allow us to attack that problem and get it done in a finite time.
Dan?
I found that in a public university allowed me to move from one interest to another. So I started out in physics. I was teaching physics at the graduate level and moved to psychology, then to economics. And when I did the work which led to the Nobel Prize, I was able to use the tools that I learned in physics and in psychology in the economic applications that I was interested in. So I think my career is an example of the opportunities that a good public university with lots of options gives you. I will say one thing more about it, which is that I was always driven by curiosity and satisfied if I could solve the puzzle of the day. The Nobel Prize was just frosting on the cake, because the day-to-day work was what was satisfying.
For me, the one thing that I think has been most important in my career is focus. That is, choose an important big problem, as Saul said, and then focus on that, and always be that the subject of your goal, and not be diverted by other interesting things that come up. So when I started, I had a plan. It was a 20-year plan to solve a molecular problem, and I designed a way of going about doing it, and I stuck with that and focused, and I feel that served me very well.
So we're going to bring things to a close. I just want to say something about the context of this discussion, and then we'll give a warm round of applause to our Nobel laureates who have been just so stimulating this afternoon. But we're just very grateful to all of you, both here and in the adjoining halls, for joining us for the first Berkeley Talks, Thought Leaders in Conversation. This is the inaugural event. It's part of both Cal Day and of Cal Performance's 2014-2015 season. And those of you who are here and those of you who are coming here will learn a lot about the wonderful opportunities Cal Performances brings to our students and our community. This is a new series of events that I'm moderating this academic year. It will bring international thought leaders, public scholars, creators, and innovators on campus to examine the distinctive issues of our time, including a special event this coming fall to commemorate and examine the 50th anniversary of the free speech movement that's part of the history of this institution. The education we offer at this preeminent public research institution is always for both our students and for the public. On any given day, you will find Berkeley professors fanning out across the media landscape, blogging, speaking in public forums, testifying before legislative bodies. These are the people who are leading the charge for new efforts to address the threat of global climate change. They're advocating for more humane and effective social welfare policies. They're describing their solutions for a shortage of clean drinking water in the third world. They're interpreting data that conclusively demonstrates the threat posed by rising income inequality. They're discovering that the universe is expanding and so many other things. And they're promoting the arts and debating the meanings of literary and philosophical ideas. The list goes on and on and on as long as you are at Berkeley. Let's thank Professors Towns, Sheckman, Perlmutter, Smoot, and McFadden for joining me today and for their contributions to the intellectual community on our campus and around the world. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as we've enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you so very much.